Live. And does this mean, are we up on YouTube now? Perfect. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I will now call this joint work session of the Tigard Tualatin School District, the City of Tigard, and the City of Tualatin to order at 4:31 p.m. And to kick off the work session, I believe I'm handing it over to Director Bernard and Eric Nessie. Please take the floor from here, and if there's someone else, please welcome them in.
Actually, Director Bowman, I think that Superintendent Ricky Smith was going to maybe make a few comments along with the city managers if they had a few comments that they would like to make. So Dr. Ricky Smith, would you like to start us off, and then you can turn it over to me once you and the city managers have had a chance?
Thank you so much, Eric. Yes, just a brief word of gratitude to Mayor Snyder, who's here, to the City Council for the cities of Tigard and Tualatin, and I believe that Mayor Bubenik will be joining us later. But we thank you for the opportunity to come together in this work session and to share the work that has been done to date relative to the important asset that belongs to our respective municipalities, relative to athletic fields that are so important to our children and to our families. I really am hopeful that this evening helps you see provides you with information about all the great work that members of your respective communities have been doing relative to thinking about how we can more effectively and efficiently use these properties in support of the community that we serve. And with that, word of thanks to all of you for giving us your time this evening. I would turn it over to my colleague Sherilyn Lombos and to Steve Reimer.
Thank you, Dr. Ricky Smith. And as Dr. Sue said, we're excited to have this opportunity to be in front of the elected officials for Tigard Tualatin School District and the City of Tualatin and the City of Tigard. And we've been working together over the last several months, talking about our shared values. And I'm encouraged and excited at the prospect of coming together in this way, in this kind of partnership. So I see Mayor Bubenik was able to join us, and I am thankful that members of the Tualatin Council have been able to make this time. So thank you.
Thanks, Sherilyn. Thanks, Dr. Sue. Steve Reimer, City Manager for Tigard. Many of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet, so it's nice to meet you in this virtual setting. Hopefully someday we're all going to be meeting in person again. We've said that many times. I know when the team came forward in Tigard to ask if this is something we want to pursue, we'd said absolutely at the beginning. Looking at a collaboration that potentially could come out of something like this is important to us. And obviously, as you're going to hear from the team today, as we look at what our values are, where we're aligned, we think this is a really good opportunity. So thank you very much. Appreciate the conversation that we're going to have here over the next hour or so, and I'll turn it over to Eric.
Well, appreciate that introduction from all three of you, Dr. Sue and City Managers Lombos and Reimer. Want to thank our board for being able to make it tonight, and both city councils. I know that there have been a lot of invitations flying in the last 48 hours. I apologize for that. I think I have 4 different links to the same meeting on my calendar right now, and maybe some supporting documents that you received in multiple as well. But this is a crucial collaboration that we're going to be discussing today, and one that I'm just super excited about. I'll take a second to introduce myself and then give you a kind of the roadmap for the presentation tonight. So I'm Eric Nessie. I've been in Tigard Tualatin School District. This is my 23rd year. I started out as a teacher at Tualatin High School back in the late 90s, transitioned to become an administrator at Hazelbrook, and did that for 15 years, first as an assistant principal, later as principal for 6 years. And then I transitioned over to the district office in 2018 and went to work in our operations department supporting the bond projects that were happening in the district. And that's where I really became exposed to this concept of athletic field reservations at a different level than I had been ever before, and understood some of the intricacies and the difficulties that end users were having with our field reservation policies. And it led me into conversations with both city parks department leaders, and that has led us to where we are today, to share with you some exciting, what we think is a really exciting opportunity to coordinate, get alignment, and really it's all about benefiting our community. It's about benefiting our community in alignment with our values. And so we're just thrilled for the opportunity to talk to you about that today. I'm going to start things out with this presentation that I think is a total of 14 slides. So we kept it fairly succinct for you tonight. And about partway through, I'm going to turn it over to Ross Hoover, who is the Parks Director for the City of Tualatin. Ross will share some different components to our plan with you, and then he'll turn it over to Rick Gruen. Rick is the Parks Director for the City of Tigard. And then importantly, it is a work session. We want to turn it over to all of our elected officials and board and just have a robust conversation about what you've heard and some initial thoughts, and hopefully some thumbs up that this is a project that we should pursue. So with that, let's jump into this first slide, and I'll provide just kind of this overview of what our objectives are for the next 12 slides. So at the risk of starting at the basement level, we do want to spend a few minutes and just talk about the background of our athletic field situation, kind of how our organizations intersect as it relates to athletic fields. And we also want to share some community feedback that we've been hearing relative to how we are managing some of our assets with our athletic fields. For our elected officials, there's a chance that you may have heard some of this feedback already through email or through personal conversations with citizens who are those end users that we interact with. And as we get into that feedback, we're also going to want to talk about some of the solutions that we have to that feedback. And we knew that in order to really do robust problem solving, it has to start with how our values align. And so we've spent a little time to put together a slide that shows you how the guiding documents for each of our three agencies intersect. And I think you'll very quickly see that there is strong alignment that tells us that this is a project that we can pursue jointly and feel like our values will be upheld. At around that point, I'm going to be turning it over to Ross, and he will be sharing a proposal that we have to bring alignment to our athletic field reservations between our three agencies. And that will lead to an expanded field availability and field inventory that we have in the district. And so that's a really exciting opportunity for our community. Ross will then turn it over to Rick, who will talk about some measures of success, along with some short and long-term planning that would need to go along with that. And then we will cut ourselves off and jump into some discussion and probably start with some initial thoughts from our school board, and then just take turns going between each of the three organizations, asking questions, talking about the merits that you see associated with the project, and any challenges or concerns that you might have. So that's kind of the roadmap for this afternoon. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does the Tigard Tualatin School District and the City of Tigard and the City of Tualatin, how do we intersect when it comes to athletic fields? I'll start from the very beginning, or like I said, kind of that granular level. We all rent and reserve field space to our local sports groups. And when we're talking about fields as opposed to courts, we're talking about lacrosse, football, soccer, softball, and baseball. I hope that I've covered all five, because I'm sure I'll hear about it if I haven't mentioned all five of them. And so our main users there are the youth groups that exist in Tigard and Tualatin, and they each have athletic teams that hopefully grow up and then become involved in our high school athletic programs. There are other groups that rent and reserve from us that are not within our, kind of our city boundaries, that are outside of it, that support youth athletics in the metro area. And then there are some adult leagues that are either currently reserving from us or would like to reserve from us, but maybe don't have the ability to because we don't have enough field space. So at the ground level, that's what field reservation looks like and who we're reserving to currently. From a historical standpoint, there are intergovernment agreements or IGAs that have been developed between the district and Tigard, the city of Tigard, and the district and the city of Tualatin. The ones that are most recent in our history in Tigard at Metzger Elementary, we have an IGA where the city of Tigard Parks Department is maintaining the community garden there and the fields there. And on the Tualatin side, we have an IGA that dictates our agreements to the Tualatin High Stadium turf that we co-manage. And I can't recall the year that that was put into place, but we've been co-managing that for several years. So there's a history of intergovernment agreements between our entities over the last several years. And typically, we operate in silos. We rent to these organizations independently. And when things flare up, maybe an issue arises either at Metzger or at Tualatin High, and then we'll have some interagency conversation and solve problems that way. So then there's a two-way interaction that comes about. But it's not been until about the last 6 or 8 months where our three organizations have started to pull together and done a much deeper level of collaboration, which is really at the heart of what we want to share with you today. And there's really two reasons that three organization collaboration has taken root. Number one is that each of our organizations, for different reasons, has been considering policy adjustments to our field reservation policies. And as a school district, we were recognizing that it had been over a decade since we updated our documents that dictated our policies. And so it was time for a refresher. In the cities, it was maybe a little bit different background. And I'm gonna pause here for a second and turn it over to Ross to describe a little bit about the policy work that has been started already on the Tualatin side, so that we can ensure that his council sees how our groups came together. Ross?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Ross Hoover, Director of Parks and Recreation at City of Tualatin. And yeah, I would echo what Eric's saying. What we know is that we have policies in place that are one, not necessarily in alignment with our current values, and two, not current modern use policies or use expectations. And so really saw that internally, but also heard externally from our users, from our youth groups, from our organizations and our communities, that we can do better. So that's in City of Tualatin. That's sort of how we came about it. Rick, I don't know if you have anything to add, but please feel free.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. Rick Ruin, City of Tigard, Parks and Recreation. Very similar. As we just finished up adoption with our Parks and Recreation System Plan, we're focused around equity and access, and we're aware that our current policies are not aligning with our values, as Ross and Eric are mentioning. So as we're starting to look at how to create more accessibility for non-historical users, we have many new youth groups wanting to find access to our fields that right now there are barriers. So consistent with the City of Tualatin and the school district, this is what brought all three of us together. So thank you.
Thank you both for that quick interjection. I wanted to highlight the fact that each of our agencies was kind of tinkering with, or on the cusp of getting involved in some policy adjustments. And, the city of Tualatin had actually already begun some conversation around that topic. And then we blended that with community feedback that we were hearing from our end users. And it was between those two things that we really started to coordinate, because we saw themes in our user feedback that we felt like we needed to respond to. So if we can go on to the next slide, we can take a look at that. So what did that community feedback look like? Just going left to right, again, these thought bubbles just kind of represent the conversations that I was having with groups as I became part of the operations department. And some of the questions were things like this: why does an outside group have priority access to a field over groups that reside in district boundaries? I won't go into a long-winded explanation, but there was an organization that had full access and exclusive access to one of our fields. And I'm not exaggerating, it was 50 years in the making. They had been accessing and retaining access to that field for 50 years. And what the district didn't realize was that in the last decade, that organization had morphed from having all Tigard Tualatin students to very few. And so, luckily we heard that feedback and we started to make some adjustments to how we responded. But that's just an example of some input that we were receiving that we felt like we needed to respond to. We were also hearing that we share users, but our fees were different. How we build was different. When we made the fields available, say for example in the springtime, was often different. And organizations were having a hard time predicting when they were going to be able to start practices and get kids involved in their youth sports. And so some complications there. And then there were new users that wanted access, for example, to a soccer field, but couldn't because there wasn't any available space. So just some examples of the type of community feedback that we have been receiving over the last couple of years that led us to want to coordinate more deeply and examine our policies and talk about where we could grow alignment between our organizations. If you can go on to the next slide, please. We felt like it would probably be also wise to highlight some of the root causes for some of the feedback we were getting. And I've already alluded to some of it, but here's a few more details to round out your understanding of the topic. We are seeing increased demand. Our cities are both growing. Our youth sports programs are healthy. Our groups, our adult groups are hungry to get involved. And unfortunately, in the district, we have seen a reduction in field inventory over the last several years. In part, that was because of some property sales that we had, or a property sale. And then we also built a new school on a different parcel of our property, Templeton Elementary, in the heart of Tigard there, which reduced our field inventory as well. So that was part of our user feedback. We know that the current reservation policies have favored those historical organizations, and that creates barriers to equitable access for new groups. One of the key pieces here that I think really makes me feel energized and hopeful that this coordination can take root is this third bullet. And that is that as a district, we just have a really hard time keeping up with field maintenance. Our organization loves to offer our fields to our youth groups, but we just don't have the man and woman power to keep up with the maintenance required to keep them at the level that we would like to. And conversely, the parks departments, they have the mechanism for some great field maintenance, but they have fixed amounts of property. So there's, you can see that there's an opportunity for alignment there that we want to talk about and take advantage of if possible, because the district has a hard time with just keeping up with maintenance, while we know that our city partners have that fixed property where they just don't have the ability to expand. And then lastly, when we hear that feedback from our end users that they want to see a higher level of maintenance, it's just not financially sustainable for us to do, because we don't have the man and woman power to do it. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we knew that if we were going to get involved in any type of policy work where we were working together jointly on crafting policy together, that we had to show how our values and goals as a school district and cities aligned. And I'll tell you that it very quickly became evident that the themes that you see in blue in the center there are definitely themes that we find throughout our documents, and are just, they jump off the page. Excuse me. And at the heart of that is equity and inclusion. And, from a school district standpoint, providing equitable opportunities to our students, including more students, making activities accessible to them. Nothing is more important to us. And I know that both of the cities have supporting documents that align with that as well. I'll tell you that as I was able to get involved and read through the Parks and Rec, the Tualatin Parks and Rec plan and the system plan for the city of Tigard. And when I think about what also could be possible should this partnership between our three organizations take root, there's some really exciting work that could be happening across our two cities and our district in the short and near future. And I'm going to turn it over to Ross at this point to highlight the proposal that we have, and I'll be jumping back on towards the end of the presentation to reinforce a few of our thoughts as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about what this might look like for the cities of Tigard, Tualatin, and Tigard Tualatin School District. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And fortunately, there's some fantastic models out there. This is not the first time that school districts and cities have worked together to think about how to provide these types of services and places and opportunities for our communities. So when we dove in to talk and think about what this might look like in our communities, we identified the following bullets. One, that we really want and see this as an opportunity to address the community feedback that Eric just talked about, while also creating new opportunities for our community members and leveraging the assets we already have. The second bullet down is really about strengthening our partnerships with our nonprofit youth programs in our communities and reducing those barriers. And the third thought we have on this slide is identifying some short-term wins while thinking about the long-term advantages of this cooperation and how not only could we potentially come together in terms of physical space, but also in thinking about bonds and levies and long-term facility planning and how we can strengthen each other in this area. And the last bullet is that we really want to and recognize the need for our role in getting our youth active and helping to make that happen. And we see this as a role of ours as a public agency. The trends, and you feel free to click on the link you see in blue on this slide. There's some fantastic recent research that indicates that youth health and wellness, especially during COVID, and unfortunately is in decline in participation in youth sports. And so that link provides some of that research. We feel like we have a role and an opportunity to play in helping fix that. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about specifically what this proposal includes and what it doesn't, and how we might be able to work together and really strengthen each other's organizations. And that's the first bullet is that our reservation policies, our a common fee schedule, and how we prioritize different user groups can be shared. And we don't need to duplicate efforts in this area, which we're doing now. The second item on this slide is that we currently have staff in each organization whose job it is to manage our own athletic field scheduling. And what an opportunity to think about a shared scheduler and the efficiency behind that, not only the efficiency behind that from the internal perspective, but also external. So all of our user groups get a much higher level customer engagement. And it's an opportunity too to improve communication, that there's one person that's managing all the fields, and you can directly interact with them as a user of these public assets. And really an opportunity to think about the entire pool of fields, not just within a city or within the school district, but as a whole, and creating a much more potential for field availability through managing it more efficiently. And then the last bullet, as we've talked about before, this is an opportunity to think about how we allocate fields right now, and doing that from an equitable perspective, and ensuring that everyone has access to all of the fields in our service area. And on the next slide, talk a little bit about what that looks like. So right now you can see on the right side, the text is cut off, but that says field reservation hours. And you can see how many hours are currently allocated. It's over 26,000 hours annually that are used by our community groups, both at TTSD, City of Tualatin, and City of Tigard. Right now, we're allocating them very differently. And so we want to focus on an allocation model, and there's some fantastic models out there that we can base our work upon, but one that's based on need and not necessarily based on historic use or what an organization's had in the past. We can really focus on serving our youth and getting our youth active and healthy, and so that doing that by prioritizing our local nonprofit youth sports groups and giving those groups priority first. So the next slide, we'll talk about how we can work together with those groups to make this happen. First, the shared scheduler, it gives the groups access to more fields. We talked about that a little bit more. So for example, if in the City of Tualatin, all of the athletic fields are reserved already, what if a City of Tualatin group could book a field elsewhere, and then those kids could have opportunity that otherwise they wouldn't have had. So we're going to look at that, think about that, and develop a model based upon that. The second bullet, we see a need for and probably a big benefit to do some testing, some tinkering, and develop some trial sites for where we can jointly improve facilities where we have deficient fields right now that are really not usable by youth sports groups. We want to identify those potential opportunities for tinkering and trying those out and seeing what this relationship can look like and how we can improve fields. And on the third bullet, you'll see kind of a longer term or a more robust version of the second bullet, and that is to really work together to think about how we're maintaining and providing the operations and management of our fields. And so where we have these strategic school sites where we can make improvements to those and work together between the city and school district to improve those fields, we see that as a huge benefit to what currently in some cases is idle field space, that the city does not need to go purchase new land, and the school district does not need to make capital investments or investments to those fields to make them playable. That we feel like that's a huge win. And on the next slide, going to hand this over to Rick, but this slide's really focused on what we think are measurable outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. Kind of the home stretch here to wrap this presentation up. So we also looked at what we anticipate are measures of success by removing a number of barriers around equity, access, and economy. Bullet one is increased field use and youth participation. Bullet two is create equitable availability and use. Bullet three would be to find that revenue stream to support operations, as the earlier slide mentioned. From a sustainability standpoint, how do we become sustainable from a cost recovery standpoint to be able to activate these fields and provide operation and maintenance support to the fields? Bullet four is reduce processing time of applications. We all have a very onerous system of working with our youth groups to create field space and reservations. So we believe we can become much more efficient and equitable in our allocation and processing of applications and permits. And lastly, as the theme throughout this presentation is not only strengthening our own three-way partnership, but strategic partnerships with others that can help leverage service to support the demand that's within the cities and the school district. Next slide. So with the councils from Tualatin and Tigard and school board, these are some of our asks for discussion as you consider our presentation. One is, and our first step is to continue to collect feedback from key stakeholders. Tonight is the start of meeting with the elected officials, and we appreciate your time tonight to hear our presentation. We'll also come back, and Ross and I will work with our Parks and Rec boards and committees. We do want, as a group, to reach out to the principals, the athletic directors, and coaches, which utilize our spaces and how we can improve access. I think Eric mentioned early on, one of our drivers behind this is how do we encourage user participation at the youth level and feed into the high school programs to strengthen capacity. We all know we have and have seen lower participation numbers, not only at the youth level, but we also know there's lower participation on the high school teams. And we're already starting to have conversation with our youth groups, and we'll continue to outreach to them. So as we're working to pull all this together, we do have in place IGAs, which are two-party IGAs. What our ask tonight is, to get support to prepare an MOU to codify this collaboration as we move forward to the next slide. So by having that MOU, and this might be directed to city leadership and to the school board, is to continue to have Ross and Eric and I and Darren and others continue to work with Sherilyn and Steve to develop a more robust three-party IGA that would allow for some of the concepts we presented tonight in shared scheduling and strategic activation of our fields. Kind of thinking long-term, not to spend much time with this, but we're brainstorming ways already to expand. If this partnership works, we can continue to look at expanding our after-school programming. I know for my team that are currently doing after-school programming at Tualatin Templeton, it's been well received, and I think all of us would look at ways to increase and expand those after-school programming. That could also filter into expanded partnerships between our libraries and the schools. We've seen from the pandemic how important our Parks and Rec is for improving health and wellness. So looking at expanding into the health and wellness program opportunities. And lastly, city leagues. As a longtime coach in the LO school district, but nonetheless as a high school coach for many years, as much as my kids love playing high school sports, they were never as more excited than playing city league sports. Being ultra competitive, they just really thrived on city league sports, intramural sports, in addition to participating at the high school, in our high school athletic programs. So at this point, Eric, I think you wanted to provide some wrap up before we turn it over for discussion.
Yeah, and honestly, I the three of us have been droning on for about 35 minutes. I'm not sure how much more everybody could stand of our voices, but I guess I just wanted to conclude this portion of the presentation before we turn it into the discussion phase, that and I want to emphasize just a couple of points. I don't know that there has ever been a more important time for agencies to collaborate, public agencies to collaborate, and to do so for the benefit of our communities. And this project that we're talking about, Rick and Ross and Darren and I have been talking since this last summer and really getting into conversations about how it could work. But once we saw our students return in the fall, and we saw them return and realized that we had an uphill battle reconnecting with a lot of those students, I just feel a heightened sense of urgency and a heightened sense of obligation to create new opportunities where none have previously existed. And I feel like this is a starting point for that. So we know we can do a better job with how we do field reservations in the district. And we feel like we can do better work than we have in the past. We can provide for greater access so there can be a greater amount of outreach to those youth programs. And we're excited for the discussion around this topic to see if we can make this collaboration work. So maybe with that, I'll pause my talking. And Dr. Sue, I'm not sure if you had any specific discussion order that you'd like to go in, but that notwithstanding, maybe we could start with hearing from a representative from the Tigard Tualatin School Board. Maybe Director Bowman, you could take an opportunity to maybe just provide some first thoughts, and then we can turn it over to each of the cities to do the same, and just generate some dialogue so we can start to hear what people believe are some merits to this and any challenges or concerns or questions that you might have that we can help with.
And Eric, I would offer this evening also that we are aware that as a work session, no decisions can be made. However, this is a marvelous opportunity to engage in conversation, share first thoughts, as we call them in Tigard Tualatin, and then things that we need to consider relative to this work in preparation for potentially bringing an MOU to our individual constituents, our individual boards that for further approval and discussion at that level. So with that, Chair Bowman, if you'd like to facilitate that conversation.
Absolutely. Thor or Patty, can we remove the slides so we can see each other? Thank you, Eric, Ross, and Rick. That was an incredibly exciting proposal. I think we're going to definitely have questions and comments, but I'm excited, and I think the path you're taking us down is innovative and visionary and exciting. And I also wanted to add that I think it aligns really well with the TTSD moves in the last couple of years toward expanding opportunities for extracurricular activities and sports, removing cost barriers. So I absolutely see a lot of potential here. I've got some specific questions, but I'm going to hold actually, and I'm going to hand it over to Mayor Snyder or Mayor Bubenik. And then let's use after they speak, let's use the raise hand function because there's so many folks on the Zoom so we can actually track and make sure we don't miss anyone. So Mayor Snyder.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly an exciting opportunity, I think, for our communities in general and the people that we serve. I think of, our two cities and school district as really being critical to the fabric of our communities. And I think that this is a way to enhance that. I know that there's going to be some questions, I suspect, from some of our city councilors just to prepare the teams about, if the cities are going to be doing more maintenance on school facilities, is that, an appropriate use of city funds? Is that, from my perspective, I look at this as like, these are system resources that we can all use and take kind of a pretty big picture look at it. By doing that, the city is enhancing the availability of fields that might not be available or in the same condition. And having witnessed a compound fracture happen on one of your not well-maintained fields in the last couple of years while I was coaching flag football, like this is a real thing for people. And so I guess I just want to point out that there may be some real questions, and I think we all need to be able to answer those questions and have a clear understanding in our mind. I think it's clear to me, though, that the school district is not necessarily in the broad field business, and that if we as a community want to be able to use those fields in a broader way, we may have to step up to the plate as a city too. So with that, I'm really excited for the opportunity to have the discussions, and thank you.
Mayor Bubenik?
Good afternoon. I just got three things. One, at a recent lunch that Mayor Snyder and I were at with Mayor Mays described how this had worked for years in Sherwood, that the Sherwood School District fields were all taken care of by the city of Sherwood for the exact reason of maintaining, though the school district didn't have the ability to maintain the fields. It worked great for years. And had centralized scheduling, centralized fees, everything that we're looking at tonight. But a year or two ago, the Sherwood School Board decided to part ways and do it on their own. And per Mayor Mays, it was to the deficit or to the negative for the school district because the fields have fallen apart, that they weren't what they were before, and there's a problem scheduling. So I think this is a terrific idea. We could see what worked for, our sister city to, next to us in Sherwood for years, and that people loved. As Mayor Snyder saying, I think we just got to be forward thinking and try a new approach. This is something I like to do. We have the resources, we can share it. Let's make it work. And finally, I know, I think Jason might have alluded to it. I'm anticipating pushback from those sporting clubs that might feel threatened they're going to lose playing field time. When we brought this idea up a year or so ago about increasing our fees or employing park fees, we heard from some of our clubs here in the city that were firmly against that, didn't want to do it, didn't want to pay any additional fees, and did not want to give up any time to smaller, lesser known clubs or clubs that were just playing for fun versus kids in those higher end sports clubs. So that's all I have, and I just look forward to this discussion. I think this is something we can make work and make work very well.
All right, thank you very much, mayors. With that, again, let's use the raise hand function just so we can track and make sure everyone is speaking. So we've got a lineup. Councillor Pratt, why don't you lead us off?
All right, I have a few questions in two different areas. The first is, so I want to understand this correctly. Is the trade-off that the cities will get more use of these fields, the school district fields, and trade-off for that, we are going to pay out of our budgets for the maintenance of these property or fields? Is that how it will work, or who will pay for the maintenance, even though the cities are doing it?
Thank you, Councilor Pratt. So the maintenance, added maintenance costs to improve these fields. So there's a new fee structure, and it's a shared fee structure across all organizations and managed by that one person, ensuring that we collect fees for the use of the fields. Those dollars, not only do those dollars pay for the wages and salaries for that position, but also those dollars can be put back into investment in the actual physical space in the fields themselves. And so those become the O&M for the fields. And part two of that is, as we mentioned in one of the slides, this aligns well with future conversations about potential bond and levy investments and where our priorities are and how we want to invest. It's potential to see this as an opportunity to invest on school district property from the city's perspective, because the city does not need to purchase land to make those future field investments. The land is already there. So that's just a quick answer to your questions, Councilor.
Okay, my second part of that, or I guess the follow-up question to that is, I'm thinking of like some of our grade schools, there are playgrounds. So who would pay for the replacement of those capital items when that time comes?
Great question. Something that I think we need to define within an IGA. It would be that question.
Okay, then I have.
How do we make those joint investments?
Yeah, and then I have just a couple questions about equity. I heard a lot of references to the local nonprofit sports groups. What I'm wondering, if we have a group that maybe they're less formal, but they are helping, the youth with soccer, whatever, but they're not a official 501c3, will they be included in this lineup of people that are prioritized?
Yeah, so yes, I think one of the things we identified was that we have groups that are not official 501c3s or official youth sports groups in our cities and in our school district. The question arose as how do we address that? And so one of the items that we talked about was how do we bring community to the existing organizations, or how do we connect the youth with other opportunities? And so that's something that we've identified a need for, and it would show up again in our IGA or MOU.
Okay, thank you. And then my very last question, and it's half curiosity, is there's a big focus here on youth, and I'm just in the name of equity, I'm kind of wondering if there's desire on the parts of adults to use these fields, or are we all just walking the trails and playing pickleball?
Yeah, we do have a number of adult groups on our fields as well, and absolutely, there is an opportunity for more adult play as well. It creates opportunities for adults, and so, however, the priority user group, the large majority of hours booked on city and school district fields are our youth nonprofit sports groups, our local sports groups, and so those would be the groups we would come first. Over, say, for-profit entities that are operating on public space.
Okay, Council President Liu.
Thank you. I'm really excited at the potential, looking at this on a global level and looking at it just citywide, because I think unless you're intimately involved in the school district, not a lot of our community members see us as two separate, functioning bodies that really have not a whole lot to do with each other. It's like, well, that's, TTSD stuff. I don't know a whole lot about that. They expect us to know a lot about it, and a field is a field to them. And I think it's a really great opportunity to be able to harness that on a global level, and to really be able to open up the access and one system to look at it and all of that. I think it's also really important that kids and adults who want to play have a place to play. We've learned, especially on our parks and our trails, how important that outdoor space is and time to get away. And as we look to make Tigard a more dense place, those open spaces become even more valuable, and time to be outside and to play and on sports teams. And I just want to emphasize how important I think it is to make sure that all different level of sports teams, have access, not just those pay to play, highly competitive, but the kids who maybe don't have the money, or it's more club level. And I'd really like to see our Parks and Rec take off and provide more of that programming to access all sorts of our community members and our youth that maybe wouldn't have access to it otherwise. It provides an opportunity, to play and develop important life skills, and just have a safe place to be able to spend your time. So I think it's a wonderful idea. I certainly have a million questions as a financial person in regards to what this would look like. I think it's no secret that we've focused a lot in Tigard recently, and we've raised a lot of rates in order to be able to maintain our parks, even to bring them back up with a whole bunch of deferred maintenance. And so really interested in the detail level, but big picture, I think it's really important that we move forward. And there's just so much potential here I'm really excited about.
So I do just want to quickly say, apparently some folks' calendar has a 5:30 end time. Some folks' calendar has a 6 p.m. end time. So please be, if we can limit to 1 or 2 questions per person, so we can try to get through the remaining 6 or 7 hands. Vice Chair Lynn.
Thank you, Ben. I just wanted to echo what Heidi said about the collaboration. As a person at the district level who deals with really multiple cities, right? It's nice to see the cities working together. I just want to also echo the previous points about youth engagement and participation, and I guess I'll just take that to the next step and say, if we're going to prioritize underserved communities, or if we're going to prioritize equity, there's got to be a really clear process and procedure for doing that and for ensuring that happens. So I'm glad that there's the will, but there also needs to be the way. And we got to, maybe that doesn't go in the IGA, but it's got to be carefully laid out because as you know, we have the will to do something and it doesn't turn out the way we want it to. For example, I think you could think about right now, are there community-based organizations that serve particular populations in the community that we want to connect to and prioritize and put on that list and put out there? I think that's really important. The other question, I think, is around equity of access between the cities, right? And making sure, if this is sort of all under one umbrella now, how do we make sure that Tigard and Tualatin get sort of equal treatment and so on? So.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lynn. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. A couple of questions. One, I'm also too very excited about this potential, and I think the collaboration can be fantastic. Perhaps, and I wonder, since historical organizations can mean so much to so many different people, what that term means and who's actually within that list. I think it'd be helpful if we saw what that list is. And then in addition to equity, I'd like to raise gender, because I know oftentimes, particularly if you're on a women's lacrosse team, you're at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, which has a whole nother set of implications to that. So I just want to raise at least the aspect of adding gender as well. And if we could get a list of the historical organizations, and also as a probably newest council member, I'm not sure if I know what all the fields or the potentials are. So if there's a map or a graph we could have, that would be great, if it's not too much trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newton.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'll make this brief. I'm just really excited about this because I always viewed a potential for us to look at all of our fields, parks, and school sites as community assets. I know a lot of people that don't have kids in schools, and if we could get them connected to the importance of sharing these assets, I think it would be great. I think it's a good idea to look at strategic sites to start with. One of the things I would be looking for is we have to remember these are schools. And so we have to be sensitive to the fact that there are times of day when we've got children there, and we want to make sure that we're looking at their needs as it's important for them to feel safe and focus on their education. The other thing I will say quickly is I really like the idea of a shared scheduler. I think a shared scheduler could be looking at the different groups and the opportunities to make it work and kind of fold everything together. They would just have their eyes on all the availability, and I think that would be great. Back when I was on staff in Tigard and negotiating the field use with the youth leagues we had, we found that some of the leagues were reserving field time. They weren't using it, and then other groups were coming on and using it. My concern for them was liability, because if they had the reservation, they were liable. But I also see that a scheduler, a shared scheduler, could make sure that that the youth groups and all groups' needs were being met, but that we could have maximum use of the field. So I agree with most everything else that was said. I'm really excited, and I think this is a fabulous opportunity, and our communities would be well served. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Irvin.
Well, as a former Parks and Rec Advisory Board member, this is exciting, and I think, especially as I can speak as a Tigard resident, have really wanted to just see kind of our rec department get bolstered and really grow into something that is really community building. And so I feel like this is a really great place. And I think Council President Lube and Councillor Pratt kind of mentioned a few things. In fact, Vice Chair Lynn did too. They answered sort of or asked some of my questions already. I was curious, and this is just, you don't need to answer it now, but potentially, I know one thing when we were looking at Cook Park fields and getting better baseball fields there was the potential for more kind of tournaments to come, and then we get to kind of capitalize on the food and lodging tax because of that. And I'm wondering if this is another way to be able to capitalize on that kind of and share that revenue between the cities and the school district. And I was curious in terms of when you talked about getting feedback from the teams, if that was mainly the coaches' feedback, if that was family feedback, or if you've been able to gather some student feedback in terms of really what they felt was missing, what their concerns were, what they wished was there. And if that was part of the, like I said, the community feedback that you had mentioned. And then I also was curious, and Councilor Pratt brought this up, mentioning playgrounds, is the assumption that, and this is my last bit, we are specifically looking at properties that would work for those 5 sports that were mentioned at the beginning versus ones that have playgrounds and other play areas. That was my assumption, but maybe I need some clarification on that. And that's all.
Can someone answer that question now?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. So yes, primarily focusing on the sports fields first. That's where we see our greatest deficiency and gaps in our facilities in the cities, and where we are hearing from our user groups where there's area for improvement on school district property.
Great. All right, Councilor Goodhouse.
Always finding the mute button, still always fun. One of the things, and I remember years back with the Tigard Council, we talked about it. One of the big important things I want to make sure we focus on is also keeping the fields affordable, because with schools changing decades ago from not having youth sports in there. I remember when I was a kid and went to Templeton and Tualatin, there was all the sports available there. But talking to a lot of the non-profits, you know, a lot of that's offered, and they still have to do a lot of fundraising to keep that affordable. So they still are charging sometimes a couple $100s a year to people to play these, and to them it's a bargain, but still that's a lot of money to come up with. So even in my thought, even if we have to subsidize it in a bit, this is just a way for people to stay active, so these organizations can keep providing those fields and that different outlet for youth. I think the biggest thing is for youth to be able to get out there, be active, be part of a team. So I agree that we extend it as far as we can, but also with all those organizations that have been there for a long time, do what we can to keep those affordable, or even make that part of the Parks and Rec program where we backfill that if we have to make sure that they can use those. But I do agree that we do need to tighten it up too. If sometimes they're booking fields and not using them, then that just restricts what everyone else can be. But I like the idea of us combining resources where if one field's not available, Tualatin's not that far from Tigard or Sherwood or vice versa, or anywhere. So if they can move around, that gives more availability. But I can't, stress enough how much to really make this affordable and still keep these open to all those different youth programs.
Thank you. Councilor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. I thank you so much for the presentation. I too am really excited about this. When we just recently had the consultants in around the values that our community has around connection in our parks and connecting. And I think this is a really strong way of connecting our communities and our participants from all the school districts, as well as these groups that are historic, as well as new groups that want to be participating. So I agree with what else has been said as far as doing it in a way that is, speaking of youth, doing it in a way that is meaningfully equitable. And the fact that these cities and the school boards coming together around this is encouraging to me as far as the direction that we want to go as a city. My question, the other comment I want to say is I like these measurable outcomes, and the long-term planning ideas are both really exciting. I took pictures of those last two slides, so that hit me where I lived. And I wanted to sort of talk about some of the sustainability things. I love the collapsed efficiency and sustainability ideas around this and helping make it safer. And I also know that from working with the Bee City stuff with parks in our area, that schools have more safe standards around using pesticides and other things. And I'm curious if you see this also sort of cross-pollinating safety protocols and around our city parks as well. Thank you again.
Councilor Brooks, thank you. I just wanted to quickly answer that. Yes, sustainability, thinking of being mindful about what types of products we're using on our facilities, how we're investing in our facilities, making sure that the investments, the physical assets themselves are done sustainably. I know that all of our organizations have that as part of our strategic documents. And I know we can create an IGA model that allows adaptation and growth and continuous improvement as we grow as organizations, independent organizations in this area, as we develop, our management procedures develop as well. So over time that we stay adaptable in that area.
I do have to say in my day job, we have a pets and kids welcome policy. So it is very cool to see a young one on the Zoom with us. Councilor Sacco.
Thank you. I just want to thank everybody for their hard work thus far. And I really appreciate the presentation. And as a mom who had a child go through field related sports from kindergarten through senior year, I know that this is something that's much needed. And I really appreciate it. Councilor Goodhouse kind of alluded to my questions. They don't need to be answered today, but just maybe in follow-up conversations. I believe Ross mentioned that the fees would be increasing. I would just be curious how, like, what percentage of increase we're going to see, and look for some scholarship opportunities possibly. You know, we talk about equity and inclusion. Is this going to exclude any programs or create barriers for new ones entering? And then my only other comment was around the scheduling and making sure that's accessible to all as well, including non-English speaking residents of both of our cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Reyes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of you that took their time to be in this meeting and to support this brainstorming or idea of sharing the parks and making sure that everyone is enjoying what we all, you know, like the parks that we have in our areas. I want to echo what someone said about we all want everything we're saying is great and wonderful, and I think that it's gonna help. I trust that that we're looking at this from an equitable lens. But I did like what someone said about policy and procedures, because that's what's going to come down to. And I want to make sure that that's really clear to everyone. I don't know if it was Dr. Martin who said it, but it was something about once we take action and we're ready, that they're clear, because say someone reserves the space, but then they're there 45 minutes later, or they never arrived. There's an empty spot there. How are we going to handle those situations? There's going to probably be conflict. If someone comes in, starts using it, 30 minutes later, they're like, no, you need to leave. We RSVP this place. So for me, it's more like the, once we're there in that, how are we going to handle conflict? How are we going to handle the management of those individuals that are going to rent or use the space? So that's where I feel will be, whoever's putting that together, I think that will be, that's the job, that's the hard job, I think, trying to coordinate everybody's way of thinking and style and culture and ethnic and everything. And so I think everything's great, but I do feel that that's where the big bulk of the work is going to be at. How are we going to make sure that everyone is understands what they're doing, and then handle conflict and resolution. So putting a good policy and procedures in place, having that done will be very crucial and vital for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. The one comment / question I wanted to bring forward, and I don't need an answer tonight, but I'm wondering if there may need to be some sort of crosswalk across the 3 organizations of existing policies. So one that's come to mind for me, obviously, is the district passed the Every Student Belongs policy, which requires all of our properties to not allow the display of symbols of hate. So ensuring that if we have to have different policies on different spaces, I suppose we could accommodate that, but I think it'd be even better if that could be included in the IGA as us all agreeing to the same set of policies. Any other questions or comments from counselors or directors? Hearing none. Vice Chair Lynn.
I do wonder, just as a member of the community with children and would there be the opportunity for free access for families, right? And I get that there's a cost in terms of maintaining it, and so we have to be able to pay for this, but is there a way to support that?
I'll take a crack at that one, Dr. Lynn, and I'll just say we want everybody to be able to access our facilities, and that's regardless of people's socioeconomic status. And so a couple of things that I've heard, scholarships, yes, we have to talk about scholarships. Fees, yes, we have to talk about fees. We can't standardize fees and have those simply passed along to families because we know that that's not going to increase the type of accessibility that we're looking for, which is to engender more use from families and students that haven't had the historical use that we would like to see. So, I'm kind of talking out both sides of my mouth, but I'm confident that we can do that. We can, I feel like, people can solve their own problems. And I feel like just with the enthusiasm that we can create around this, with the outreach that we intend to do with our youth groups, I just feel like, we can put together a great program that speaks to all the questions that all of you have had tonight. And speaking of which, you've been very gracious in not putting us on the clock to answer every single question that has arisen, but we have lots of questions to answer at this point. And so I'm looking forward to rolling up my sleeves with Rick and Ross and Darren and the rest of our Tigard Tualatin team, and starting to work with our youth groups, supporting them and getting some access to our students that haven't had access in the past, and seeing if we can raise some levels of participation immediately. Like I said, as we were closing out the presentation, I'm feeling a sense of urgency around this. We need to wrap our arms around our kids right now, and there's never been a more important time for us to do that. So we will look forward to providing you answers to some of the questions that you've asked and moving this work forward. And I hope that answers your question in a long-winded way.
Well said, Mr. Nesi. Thank you. Counselor Hillier.
Thank you. So I had a couple questions. Is this our only opportunity for input? I saw that was the first level.
No, this would not be the only opportunity for input. Counselor Hillier, what we see, this is really a two-step process. First, let's put in place an MOU, a document that really acts as a guide for our future work. One that defines what we're not doing together and what we're doing together, and acts as a guide as our interaction with our community groups as we move forward. So we will work on that MOU and bring that back to each organization. And then two, that's the foundational document that moves us forward in our engagement with our community, and ultimately will result in an IGA, which obviously requires each body's approval as well.
Great, thank you. And I just I hope in the asset list that you're making up, we have something that has lights, right? Like, And then my other comment is just, I would love to see somehow to reward good behavior for taking good care, for organizations who take good care of it, and the maybe organizations who, those of us who've been on those fields for 20 years spend hours and hours looking for things because the group before us chose to throw their beer cans all over the place and you can't find anything. So anyway, I'd just love to see a reward for good behavior potentially.
Yeah, Eric, please.
I was just going to say, Cindy, I echo your sentiments, and we have a lot of organizations in the community that spend a lot of time tending to these fields and doing a fantastic job coaching our children and doing a good job wrapping their arms around them. And yes, there should be some an understanding that there needs to be some merits involved with that. I also think that I lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. I apologize.
We're thinking about softball. I know.
All right. Last call from counselors and directors. Okay. Well, I think hopefully what you heard was overwhelming support to move forward and definitely keep us in the loop as respective bodies. Any closing comments from Eric, Ross, or Rick? Or Counselor Goodhouse, do you have a question before we go?
Just one quick comment just in my head is what outreach. I know that as Mayor Bubendick mentioned, that all these different organizations have been using these for a long time. Are we doing any listening sessions or outreach with them prior to working on the MOU? I just don't want to be doing an MOU or start moving towards this, and then all these groups come out and say that increase is too much or what's going on. So I'd really like to see some listening sessions or outreach to all the existing or anyone we know that have been using the field.
Yes, Councillor Goodhouse, it's starting and will continue. I know Ross is meeting with some of the user groups. I think it's next week, isn't it? Or later this week. And we'll be doing the same in Tigard.
That was on your plan, wasn't it? I saw, wasn't that outlined as one of the actions you guys were taking?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
All right. Any closing comments from Eric, Ross, or Rick?
I just want to thank everybody for listening tonight and showing your support and appreciation. I know you asked many great questions, and I know our collective next step would be to put together some responses to your questions as we continue our work, but we'll be sure to get together and provide comment back to all the counselors and directors that offered some great suggestions and comments. But again, thank you for all your time and letting us share this presentation.
Ross?
Thank you, Chair Bowman. Yes, so there's some fantastic models out there of school districts and cities that have done this in the past. Some of them are still going strong, some have failed. We have lessons to learn from both to help make our community more equitable, health and wellness focused, and using our fields and our processes more efficiently. And so I'm excited and thankful for your time tonight.
All right, Eric.
I remembered what I was going to say. Just as we did a crosswalk to consider the values of our three organizations and how the values of our organizations intersected that made us feel comfortable moving forward. Part of our feedback loop with our user groups needs to figure out the alignment that we have when we cross-reference our values with theirs. And so, Cindy, to your point, asking folks to be good stewards of our sports fields, we need to know that as we step into this work, that we need alignment with our three agencies, and we also need alignment with our youth groups. And I think that that's an important step in this process. We will continue to be really good listeners because we don't have all the answers. These youth organizations many of them have been existing and working with our agencies for a long time, and they have great input to offer. So we're looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and having those conversations with them. We owe you some answers to questions, and just really looking forward to continuing this work.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for making time in your schedules to be part of this joint work session. This is a really exciting opportunity for our community. So with that, I will close the work session at 5:46 p.m.